The winter came down hard that year, the kind that didn't ask permission. It slammed into the valley with teeth made of ice and wind that howled through every crack in the wood. The ranch sat low where the mountains curved inward, trapping cold air like water in a bowl. Most men would have left a place like that. Jonah Mercer stayed because leaving meant admitting something had ended, and he wasn't ready for that. 3 winters had passed since his wife died. 3 winters of silence that settled into the walls like cold settles into bone. The house still stood, the barn still held horses, the fences still needed mending. But the warmth had gone out of it all. What remained was duty. Routine. The slow march of days that looked the same no matter how you dressed them up. His daughter, Ruth, was 8 years old. Small for her age, with her mother's dark eyes and a quietness that worried him. She didn't laugh much anymore. Didn't ask questions the way children should. She moved through the house like a shadow, careful not to disturb anything, as if the whole world might shatter if she made too much noise. Jonah tried. He cooked meals that neither of them tasted. He read to her at night from books whose words blurred together. He tucked her in and told her things would be all right, even though he didn't believe it himself. The silence between them wasn't comfortable. It was the kind that pressed down on your chest and made breathing feel like work. The ranch demanded everything. Feeding animals in frozen dawns. Breaking ice on water troughs with numb hands. Hauling wood until your back screamed. Fixing things that broke because winter didn't care if you were tired or grieving or alone. Jonah did it all without complaint, because complaining required energy he didn't have. Ruth helped when she could. She scattered feed for the chickens, her small hands red from the cold. She carried firewood in armfuls too big for her frame. She never said she was cold or tired. She just worked, the same way he did, like work was the only language left between them. The night the storm hit, it came with a violence that shook the rafters. Wind screamed across the valley, driving snow sideways, turning the world into a white blur. Jonah bolted the shutters and stoked the fire high. He checked on Ruth twice, pulling the blankets up around her shoulders, watching her sleep with a kind of helpless love that hurt more than it comforted. He didn't sleep much. The wind rattled the house, and every sound made him think something was breaking, another fence post snapping, another section of roof threatening to tear loose. He sat by the fire with his rifle across his knees, not because he expected trouble, but because holding it made him feel like he was doing something. By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving behind a world buried in white. The sky was pale and brittle, the kind of morning that felt like it might crack if you touched it. Jonah pulled on his coat and stepped outside. The cold hit him like a fist. That's when he saw them. Footprints in the snow. Fresh. Leading from the tree line to the barn. His hand went to the rifle. His breath came out in clouds. He moved carefully, each step deliberate, his eyes scanning the white expanse for movement. The barn door stood slightly ajar. He hadn't left it that way. Inside, the air smelled of hay and horse and something else, something human. He moved between the stalls, and that's when he found her. A woman. Curled against the hay, her coat still crusted with frost. Her face pale, her breathing shallow. But her eyes were open. And she was looking right at him. She didn't move when he stepped closer. Didn't scramble back or reach for a weapon or even flinch. She just watched him with eyes that had seen too much to be startled by one more thing. There was exhaustion in her face, carved deep, the kind that came from months or years, not just one frozen night in a barn. Jonah lowered the rifle. "You hurt?" Her lips were chapped, pale. She shook her head once. "How long have you been here?" "Since the storm hit." Her voice came out rough, like she hadn't used it in days. "I saw the light from your house. Didn't want to knock. Didn't know if you'd." She trailed off, letting the sentence die. Jonah understood what she meant. A woman alone, knocking on a stranger's door in the middle of a blizzard, it was a gamble. Some men would have helped. Some wouldn't have. She'd chosen the barn instead, chosen cold over risk. You got a name? Mara. She paused. Mara Dane. He waited for more. She didn't offer it. Then she moved, slow and careful, reaching into her coat. Jonah's hand tightened on the rifle, instinct overriding reason. She noticed, froze for a second, then continued. What she pulled out wasn't a weapon. It was paper. A letter, folded and refolded so many times the creases had worn thin. She held it out to him. Jonah took it, his fingers clumsy with cold and confusion. He unfolded it carefully, and the handwriting hit him like a punch to the gut. His own. Words he'd written months after his wife died, words he'd poured out in the middle of the night when grief made him reckless and desperate. Words about loneliness. About being terrified he was failing Ruth. About not knowing how to be enough for a child who'd already lost so much. He'd never mailed it. Never even addressed it. He'd written it and tucked it away in a book, trying to exorcise something he couldn't name. And now here it was, worn and traveled, in the hands of a stranger in his barn. How did you? His voice came out hoarse. It came to me through hands I can't trace back, Mara said quietly. Someone who knew someone. A letter with no destination found one anyway. She pulled her knees closer to her chest. I read it. I know I shouldn't have. But I did. And I thought maybe you were someone who'd understand. Understand what? She looked away, toward the barn wall, where morning light leaked through the gaps. What it's like to be lost. Jonah stood there holding his own grief in paper form, this woman's words settling into the cold air between them. He didn't know what to say. Didn't know what she wanted or why she traveled through a storm to reach a place she'd never been. But he knew it was cold. He knew exhaustion. He knew what it looked like when someone had nowhere else to go. The storm's past, he said finally. But there's more coming. It's always this time of year. He folded the letter, slipped it into his pocket. You can come inside. Warm up. Stay till the weather clears. Mara looked at him then, really looking, like she was trying to measure something invisible. You don't know me. No, Jonah agreed. I don't. Could be dangerous. Letting a stranger in. Could be. He turned toward the barn door. But freezing to death certain. I'll take my chances. He didn't wait for her answer. Just walked back toward the house, knowing somehow that she'd follow. And after a long moment, she did. Ruth was at the table when they came in, a bowl of cold oatmeal in front of her, untouched. She looked up at the sound of the door, her eyes widening when she saw the woman behind her father. She didn't speak. Just stared, her spoon frozen halfway to her mouth. This is Mara, Jonah said, keeping his voice level. She got caught in the storm. She'll be staying a few days. Ruth's gaze moved from the woman to her father, searching his face for something. Permission to be curious, maybe. Or reassurance that this stranger wasn't a threat. Jonah gave her a small nod. Ruth set down her spoon. Mara stood just inside the door, dripping melted snow onto the floorboards. She looked around the room slowly, the simple table, the cold stove, the walls bare except for one painting of mountains that had hung there long before Jonah arrived. Her eyes lingered on Ruth, softened slightly, but she didn't smile. Didn't try to make herself seem harmless or friendly. She just existed there, quiet and careful. Sit, Jonah said, gesturing to a chair. I'll get the fire going properly. Mara moved to the table but didn't sit right away. She unwound the frozen scarf from her neck, peeled off her coat. Underneath, her clothes were worn but clean, mended in places with thread that didn't quite match. She folded everything carefully, like each item mattered, then finally lowered herself into the chair across from Ruth. The silence stretched out. Not hostile, just uncertain. The kind that forms when nobody knows what words fit. Jonah worked at the stove, feeding it split wood, coaxing flames higher. The warmth began to spread slowly through the room, pushing back against the cold that had settled in overnight. He filled the kettle, set it to boil, then ladled out what was left of the oatmeal into a bowl for Mara. She took it without comment. Ate slowly, deliberately, like someone who'd learned not to waste anything. Ruth watched her the whole time. Not staring exactly, just observing with that careful attention children have when they're trying to figure out if something is safe. "You got caught in the storm?" Ruth asked finally, her voice small. Mara nodded. "I did." "Were you scared?" "Some," Mara admitted. "Cold mostly. Papa says the cold is worse than the dark." "Your papa's right." Ruth considered this, then pushed her bowl away. "I don't like the cold either." "Most sensible people don't," Mara said. There was something almost like warmth in her voice, though it came through carefully, like she was out of practice. Jonah poured tea when the water boiled, and set a cup in front of Mara. She wrapped both hands around it, letting the heat soak into her fingers. He noticed her hands were calloused, scarred in places. Hands that had worked. Hands that knew hardship. The morning passed in strange stillness. Mara sat at the table, warming herself by degrees. Ruth went about her small chores, feeding the chickens from the indoor pail, tidying her corner of the room. She kept glancing at Mara, not with suspicion, but with something closer to wonder. Like a person appearing in their house was a kind of magic she'd forgotten could happen. Jonah busied himself with tasks that didn't need doing. Organizing tools. Checking supplies. Anything to give himself something to focus on besides the strangeness of another presence in the house. A woman's presence. The first since his wife died. It felt wrong and right at the same time. Wrong because it wasn't her. Right because the house suddenly felt less like a tomb. By midday, Mara stood. "I should earn my keep," she said simply. "What needs doing?" Jonah looked at her. She was steady on her feet now, color returning to her face. "You don't have to." "I do," she said. Not defensive. Just factual. "I don't take charity." He understood that too. Wood needs stacking. Horses need brushing. The stove could use more fuel. "Show me where things are," Mara said. "I'll start." Mara worked like she'd been born to it. No hesitation, no asking twice. Jonah showed her the woodpile once, and she set to stacking with a rhythm that spoke of years doing the same. Her movements were efficient, economical. She didn't waste energy on anything that didn't serve the task. Ruth followed her outside, boots crunching through snow, keeping a few paces back. Watching. Learning. Jonah observed from the porch, pretending to check the hinges on the door while really just making sure this stranger wasn't going to vanish the moment he turned his back. But Mara didn't vanish. She stacked wood until the pile stood neat and tall, then moved to the barn without being told. Ruth trailed after her like a curious shadow. Inside the barn, Mara ran her hands over the horses with a gentleness that surprised him. She spoke to them in low tones, words Jonah couldn't hear, and the animals calmed under her touch. Even the gray mare, who'd been skittish since winter started, stood steady while Mara brushed her down. Ruth stood on an overturned bucket to reach, mimicking Mara's movements with a smaller brush. The girl didn't chatter the way children sometimes do when they're nervous. She just worked alongside this stranger, the two of them sharing the silence like it was something comfortable. By evening, the house felt different. Not brighter exactly. Not louder. Just less empty. The stove radiated heat that reached into corners that had stayed cold for months. The smell of cooking, actual cooking, not just boiled oats, filled the air. Mara had found the stores, the flour and salt and dried meat, and made something that resembled a meal. They ate at the table together. Ruth sat between them, glancing from her father to Mara and back again, like she was trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. "This is good," Ruth said quietly, and Jonah realized it was the first time she'd complimented food in longer than he could remember. Mara nodded once. "Thank you." "Mama used to make stew," Ruth continued, then stopped, her eyes darting to her father with something like guilt. Jonah's chest tightened, but he kept his voice steady. "She did. She was good at it." Ruth looked down at her bowl. The moment hung there, fragile. "I'm sure she was," Mara said simply, without pity or false comfort. Just acknowledgement. And somehow that was exactly right. The days began to blur into a pattern. Mara rose with the sun, same as Jonah. She fed the stove, started coffee, worked through the morning tasks without being asked. She mended a broken latch on the chicken coop. Patched a hole in Ruth's coat with thread from her own supplies. Fixed the wobble in one of the kitchen chairs that Jonah had been meaning to address for months. She didn't fill the silence with unnecessary words. Didn't try to explain herself or her past. She just existed alongside them, steady and solid, like she'd always been there. Ruth bloomed under the attention. Small things at first, a question about the horses, a comment about the weather. Then more. She started humming while she worked. Started asking Mara to teach her things. How to properly fold linens. How to tell when bread dough has risen enough. How to braid rope. Mara taught her patiently, showing rather than telling, letting Ruth's hands learn through doing. Jonah watched it all from a distance that grew smaller each day. He watched Mara haul water without complaint. Watched her split kindling with practiced swings. Watching her sit with Ruth in the evening, the two of them bent over some small project, their heads close together in the lamplight. He didn't let himself think about what it meant. Didn't let himself wonder what would happen when the weather truly broke and she had no reason to stay. He just let the days unfold, one into the next, and tried not to notice how the house had started to feel like a home again. Winter loosened its grip slowly, grudgingly. The storms came less frequently. The ice on the water troughs thinned. Mornings were still a bit cold, but the sun climbed higher each day, staying longer, promising something beyond the freeze. Jonah and Mara fell into a rhythm that required no discussion. They worked side by side, repairing fence lines damaged by snow and wind. Her hands moved with the same certainty as his, twisting wire, driving posts, testing tension. When something was too heavy for one, the other stepped in without being asked. No wasted words. No wasted motion. They broke ice together at dawn, their breath clouding in the frigid air. They hauled feed together in silence. They mucked stalls and carried water and chopped wood, and somewhere in all that shared labor, something shifted between them. It wasn't romance. Not yet. Maybe not ever. It was something quieter than that. Recognition, maybe. The understanding that comes when two people have both known loss and learned to keep moving anyway. Jonah found himself noticing small things. The way Mara's hair caught the light when she stood near the window. The way she pressed her hand to the small of her back after a long day, the same way he did. The way she never flinched at hardship, just met it head-on with a kind of resigned determination. She never spoke of where she'd come from or what she was running from. He never asked. It seemed like a fair trade, her silence for him. But sometimes, late at night when the house was quiet and Ruth was sleeping, he'd catch Mara staring into the fire with an expression that told him she was somewhere else entirely. Somewhere that still had hooks in her. Somewhere she couldn't quite leave behind, no matter how far she traveled. Ruth had changed too. The silence that had wrapped around her like a shroud had begun to lift. She asked questions again. Why did the horses need salt? How did you know when a storm was coming? What made bread rise? Mara answered each one with patience, never dismissing Ruth's curiosity, never making her feel small for not knowing. The girl laughed one afternoon. Just once, sudden and bright, when one of the barn cats pounced at a shadow. It was such an unexpected sound that Jonah stopped mid-swing, the axe suspended above the chopping block. He looked toward the barn and saw Ruth doubled over, giggling, with Mara standing beside her wearing something that might have been the beginning of a smile. His throat tightened. He drove the axe down hard, splitting the log clean through. That evening, Ruth set the table without being told. She chattered about the chickens, about how one of them was getting fat and might be sitting on eggs. Mara listened while kneading dough, her hands working the flour with steady pressure. "Can we keep the chicks if they hatch?" Ruth asked. "That's up to your father," Mara said. Ruth turned to Jonah with eyes full of hope. "Papa?" "We'll see," he said, and Ruth beamed like he promised her the world. After dinner, Mara washed while Jonah dried. Their hands moved in coordination, passing plates and cups in a dance they hadn't choreographed but somehow knew. His knuckles brushed hers once, accidental, and he felt the warmth of her skin even through the dishwater. She didn't pull away. Neither did he. They just kept working. Later, when Ruth was in bed and the fire had burned low, Jonah sat in his chair while Mara mended a shirt by lamplight. The needle flashed silver as it wove through fabric, closing tears, making broken things whole again. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For staying. For helping." Mara's hand stilled for just a moment. "I'm the one who should be thanking you." "For what?" She looked up at him then, the lamplight catching in her eyes. "For not asking questions I'm not ready to answer." He nodded slowly. "We all got things we're not ready to talk about." "Yes," she said softly. "We do." And that was enough. Spring came with mud and melt and the sound of water running where it hadn't run in months. The valley transformed, brown earth emerging from beneath white. Birds returned, their calls breaking the silence that had ruled all winter. The ranch felt like it was waking up, stretching after a long sleep. Jonah should have felt relief. The worst was over. They'd survived another winter. But something uneasy had settled in his chest, a tightness he couldn't name. Maybe it was the knowledge that warm weather meant travel became possible again. That Mara would have no reason to stay once the roads cleared. He didn't ask about her plans. Didn't want to hear her say she was leaving. Ruth had stopped asking when Mara would go. The girl had accepted her presence the way children accept the sun rising, inevitable, necessary, unquestioned. She followed Mara everywhere now, mimicking her movements, absorbing her quiet strength like roots drinking water. The morning the rider came, Jonah was at the far fence line, replacing posts that had rotted through. He saw the figure on the ridge first, a dark shape against pale sky, moving with purpose down the slope toward the ranch. Something about the rider's posture set his instincts on edge. This wasn't someone lost or passing through. This was someone who knew exactly where he was going. Jonah drove in the last post, gathered his tools, and headed back toward the house. By the time he reached the yard, the rider had arrived. The man sat tall in his saddle, maybe 40, with a face that had been handsome once before life carved lines into it. His clothes were fine but travel-worn. His eyes were hard, the kind of hard that came from getting what you wanted through force or fear or both. Mara stood on the porch, her body rigid, one hand gripping the railing. Ruth was behind her, peering around her skirts. "Mara," the man said. Not a greeting. A claim. "Cole." Her voice came out flat, empty of everything. So this was part of what she'd been running from. Jonah set down his tools carefully, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. He walked toward the porch but didn't climb the steps. Just stood there, present. Cole's eyes flicked to him, assessed, dismissed. "I've been looking for you for 3 months. Do you have any idea what you put me through?" "I left," Mara said quietly. "That should have been enough. You left without a word. Without explanation." Cole swung down from his horse, and Jonah noted the gun at his hip, the way his hand stayed near it. "You owe me more than that." "I don't owe you anything." Cole's jaw tightened. 2 years, Mara. We were together for 2 years. That doesn't just end because you decide to disappear in the night. It does if staying means losing myself entirely. The words hung in the air, sharp and final. Cole's face darkened. He took a step toward the porch, and Jonah moved without thinking, positioning himself between the man and the steps. She's made herself clear, Jonah said, his voice level. Cole looked at him properly now, seeing him for the first time. This is your man. This is why you left. This is Jonah Mercer, Mara said. He gave me shelter when I needed it. Nothing more. Shelter, Cole repeated, making the word sound dirty. You always did land on your feet. Found yourself a new protector already. I don't need protecting, Mara said, and there was steel in her voice now. I needed space. I needed to breathe. You never understood the difference. Cole's hand flexed near his gun. Not drawing, just reminding everyone it was there. Come back with me. We'll talk this through properly. Work it out. There's nothing to work out. Mara. She said no, Jonah interrupted quietly. You heard her. Cole's attention swung back to him, dangerous now. This isn't your concern, friend. Maybe not, Jonah agreed. But this is my land. And she's standing on my porch. That makes me concerned enough. The tension stretched thin between them, brittle as winter ice. Cole's eyes narrowed, measuring Jonah, calculating odds. His hand stayed near his gun, fingers twitching slightly. The threat was there, unspoken but real. Jonah didn't move. Didn't reach for his own rifle, still leaning against the porch rail where he'd left it that morning. Didn't square up or puff his chest or do any of the things men did when they were looking for a fight. He just stood there, calm and immovable, like a fence post driven deep. You don't know her, Cole said, his voice dropping lower, more dangerous. You don't know what she is. What she's done. Don't need to, Jonah replied. That's her business, not mine. She ran from debts. From responsibilities. You think that makes her worth protecting? I think she's free to choose where she wants to be. Jonah's voice stayed level, reasonable. And I think she's already made that choice. Cole's face twisted with something between anger and disbelief. You're going to stand there and tell me you have no claim on her? No interest? I'm telling you she's not property. Not yours. Not mine. Not anyone's. Jonah finally moved, just slightly, angling his body to keep Cole's attention on him instead of Mara. She wants to leave with you, that's her right. She wants to stay here, that's her right too. But the choice is hers. Not yours. Not mine. Hers. Behind him, Jonah felt Mara's presence on the porch. Felt Ruth pressed against her side. He didn't turn to look at them. Kept his eyes on Cole, watching for the moment the man might make a choice they'd all regret. 2 years, Cole said again, and now there was something raw in his voice. Something that might have been pain underneath the anger. I gave her everything. A home. Security. A future. Maybe she didn't want what you were offering, Jonah said quietly. And what are you offering that's so much better? This? Cole gestured at the ranch with contempt. Broken fences and hard winters and poverty. That's what she chose over me. I'm not offering her anything, Jonah said. That's the difference. The words settled between them with weight. Cole stared at him, trying to understand, and Jonah could see the exact moment something shifted in the man's face. Not acceptance. Not forgiveness. But recognition, maybe, that this wasn't a fight he could win with force or intimidation. Cole turned his attention back to Mara. Is that really what you want? To stay here in the middle of nowhere with a stranger and his child? Scraping by, working yourself to the bone for nothing? Mara was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was steady, certain. It's not nothing. And he's not a stranger anymore. You're making a mistake. Maybe, Mara said. But it's mine to make. Cole's shoulders sagged slightly, the fight leaking out of him by degrees. He looked at her with something that might have been longing or might have been grief. I would have given you everything. I know, Mara said, and there was gentleness in her tone now. Not affection, but acknowledgement of his pain. But everything you had to give wasn't what I needed. And this is... She looked past him, at the valley spreading wide and open, at the house with its worn boards and smoking chimney, at the life she'd been quietly building for the past months. Yes, she said simply. This is... Cole stood there a moment longer, and Jonah could see him wrestling with it, the urge to argue, to demand, to force the outcome he wanted. But something held him back. Pride, maybe. Or the understanding that some things couldn't be taken, only given. You're a fool, Cole said finally. Probably, Mara agreed. He climbed back into his saddle, movements sharp with barely controlled emotion. Don't come looking for me when this falls apart. I won't, Mara said. Cole looked at Jonah one last time. You better be worth it. Jonah didn't answer. Just watched as the man turned his horse and rode back the way he'd come. They stood in the yard long after Cole disappeared over the ridge. The dust from his horse's hooves settled slowly back to earth. The valley returned to its usual sounds, wind through grass, birds calling, the distant bleating of sheep. But the air still felt charged, like the moment after lightning strikes before the thunder rolls in. Ruth broke the silence first. She stepped forward, slipping her small hand into Mara's. Are you staying? Mara looked down at the girl, then across at Jonah. Her eyes held a question he couldn't quite read. If that's all right. Jonah nodded once. It's all right. Ruth squeezed Mara's hand tighter, her face breaking into a smile that reached all the way to her eyes. Good. The chickens hatched this morning. I want to show you. She tugged Mara toward the barn, chattering about the chicks, about how small they were, how yellow. Mara let herself be pulled along, and Jonah saw something in her shoulders relax, a tension she'd been carrying since Cole arrived finally releasing its grip. He watched them go, woman and child disappearing into the barn together, and felt something shift in his chest. Not the sharp pain of grief he'd grown accustomed to, but something softer. Something that felt almost like hope. The work continued. Fences still needed mending. Animals still needed feeding. The land still demanded everything they could give. But somehow it felt lighter now, the burden distributed across 3 sets of hands instead of 2, across 3 hearts instead of 1.5. Mara never claimed a room. Never asked for anything formal or permanent. She just continued sleeping in the small space off the kitchen that had once been storage, and nobody discussed changing it. Some things didn't need discussion. Some things just were. Spring deepened into early summer. The valley turned green, wildflowers dotting the meadows with purple and yellow. Ruth grew braver, louder, more herself. She laughed often now, the sound carrying across the yard while she played. She asked endless questions, and Mara answered each one with patient attention. Jonah found himself noticing the small ways the house had changed. Fresh curtains in the windows, sewn from fabric Mara had traded for in town. Wildflowers in a jar on the table. The smell of bread baking. Ruth's drawings pinned to the wall. Life creeping back into spaces that had been dead for too long. One evening, after Ruth had gone to bed, Jonah and Mara sat on the porch watching the sun sink behind the mountains. The sky burned orange and pink and gold, the colors reflecting off the clouds in shades too beautiful to name. Thank you, Mara said quietly. For today. For standing up when you didn't have to. You would have handled it, Jonah said. Maybe. But I didn't have to. That meant something. They sat in comfortable silence, watching darkness creep across the valley. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. Another answered. I never thanked you properly, Mara continued. For taking me in. For letting me stay. You've earned your place here 10 times over, Jonah said. Don't thank me for something that benefits us just as much. Still, she said. I want you to know. This place. You and Ruth. It's given me something I didn't think I'd find again. What's that? She was quiet for a moment, searching for the right word. Peace, she said finally. Just peace. Jonah nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. Yeah, he said softly. Me too. The stars emerged one by one, filling the sky with light. Inside, the house waited, warm and whole. Ruth slept soundly in her bed, no longer haunted by nightmares or silence. The stove held steady heat. The animals were fed and sheltered. The work was done, for today at least. Tomorrow would bring more. It always did. But tonight, sitting side by side in the growing dark, they had everything they needed. A family built not from grand declarations or promises, but from work and trust and quiet love. From choosing, every day, to stay. To show up. To be present for each other in ways that mattered. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. If this story touched your heart, hit that like button and subscribe for more tales from the Wild West. Share this with someone who believes in second chances and quiet love. Drop a comment below, what moment spoke to you most? Was it when Mara chose to stay, or when Jonah stood his ground? I read every comment. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next story.